Eternal God, who through Jesus Christ has revealed your glory to all nations, please protect and preserve Belize, our beloved country. God of might, wisdom, and justice, please assist our Belizean government and people with your Holy Spirit of counsel and fortitude. Let the light of your divine wisdom direct their plans and endeavors, so that with your help we may attain our just objectives. With your guidance, may all our endeavors tend to peace, social justice, liberty, national happiness, the increase of industry, sobriety, and useful knowledge. We pray, O God of mercy, for all of us, that we may be blessed in a knowledge and sanctified in the observance of your most holy law, that we may be preserved in union and in that peace which the world itself cannot give. And after enjoying the blessings of this life, please admit us, dear Lord, to that eternal reward that you have prepared for those who love you. Amen.
Oath of allegiance of a new Senate, of new senators.
Mr. Clerk, kindly administer the oath of allegiance to the new senators.
I, Linsford Castillo, do swear that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Belize and will uphold the Constitution and the law, and that I will conscientiously, impartially, and to the best of my ability discharge my duties as a senator and do right to all manner of people without fear or favor, affection or ill will. So help me God.
I, Jamal Swaso, do swear that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Belize and will uphold the Constitution and the law, and that I will conscientiously, impartially, and do to the best of my abilities discharge my duties as a senator. And I do right to all manner of people without fear or favor, affection or ill will. So help me God.
Announcement by the President.
First, congratulations to both of you. Senator Castillo, welcome back. Good to see you for 2024. And Senator Swazo, welcome. I think this is your first time. So welcome. Good morning again. Normally, for the first Senate meeting of the year, I would use the announcement on the order paper to recap the work of the Senate for the previous year, that being 2023 in this instance. I intend to do so at the next sitting of this House and use this announcement to address an important and immediate matter raised by Senator Michael Perfeet in a letter to the President dated 31st January 2024, and to which I have responded. The matter surrounds the resignation of Senator Amon Courtney as a Minister of Government and the question of whether Senator Amon Courtney can continue as leader of government business without being a minister and a member of the cabinet. It is a matter that is being discussed in the public domain and thus requires my immediate attention. As per Senator Perfeet's letter, without any ministers in the Senate, no government business nor public money business can be sponsored on February 8, 2024, or any other day as long as there are no ministers in the Senate. Senator Perfeet referenced Standing Order 21.3 and Standing Order 22 to support this position. Standing Order 21.3 states, and I quote, "Government business shall not consist of motions proposed to be made and bills sponsored by ministers, and shall be set down in such order as the government think fit." Standing Order 22 mandates for the Senate to only consider money bills, motions, and petitions, and I quote, "on the recommendation or with the consent of the Cabinet to be signified by a minister and recorded in the minutes of the proceedings of the Senate." In ruling on the matter, I requested a legal opinion from the Honorable Anthony Sylvester, the Attorney General and Principal Legal Advisor to the Government of Belize, by virtue of Section 42 of the Belize Constitution. Based on his advice and my own considerations, I am satisfied: A, that there is no need for the leader of government business in the Senate to be a minister or member of cabinet. B, the standing orders make a clear distinction between a minister and a senator in charge of government business. And C, bills, motions, petitions, resolutions, or papers may be presented by the senator in charge of government business and considered by the Senate, even where such senator is not a minister. For the purpose of clarity and the avoidance of doubt, as this is not the first time the matter has been raised, I now share for the records of this House the legal opinion of the Attorney General. Documents reviewed. 1. In preparing this advice, I have reviewed the Constitution of Belize, Senate Standing Order, Interpretation Act, and relevant judicial authorities. Relevant background analyses. 2. Since the announcement by the Prime Minister that Senator Eamon Courtney would leave the Cabinet but will remain leader of government business in the Senate, an issue has arisen as to whether this will create any challenges for getting the government's business done in the Senate. 3. For reasons which follow, a review of the Constitution and the standing orders of the Senate leads inexorably to the conclusion that there will be no problem as a result of Senator Courtney no longer being a member of the Cabinet. 4. The Constitution of Belize in Section 2 proclaims and mandates that the Constitution is the supreme law of Belize, and that any other law which is inconsistent with it shall be void. This has time and time again been interpreted by our courts, including the highest court, to mean what it says, and anything done by any arm of government which conflicts with the Constitution will be regarded as void. The significance of this is that it is the Constitution which resort must first be had in examining this issue of whether the leader of government business in the Senate must be a minister of government. By Section 55 of the Constitution, the legislature in Belize, which is to say the lawmaking body, shall consist of a National Assembly which comprises the House of Representatives and the Senate. The provisions in the Constitution relating to the Senate are found in Division 2 of Part 6 and consist of some 19 sections. Section 61 of the Constitution sets out the composition of the Senate, and Section 61(4) further sets out the appointment of the respective 13 senators. Of significance here is the number of government-appointed senators, as Section 61, subsection 4a of the Constitution explains. Of the 13 senators, 6 shall be appointed by the Governor General, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister. 7. Undoubtedly, the Constitution establishes the post of leader of government business in the Senate. This is found in Section 61(8) of the Constitution, which provides that at the first meeting of the Senate, a president must be elected, and if there is an equality of votes, the leader of government business in the Senate shall have a second vote. 8. However, there is no provision in the Constitution that mandates that there must be at least one senator in the Senate for it to be properly constituted, or that the leader of government business in the Senate must be a senator. Indeed, the only reference to a mandatory requirement in the Constitution relating to a minister is that he must be a member of the National Assembly. This is found in Part 5 of the Constitution relating to the executive, and specifically at Section 42, subsection 2 of the Constitution, which provides that a cabinet shall consist of ministers appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister from among the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. In making these selections, the Prime Minister is subject to a limitation that not more than 4 senators can serve in the cabinet. Thus, while a minister of government can be a senator, it does not follow that a minister must be a senator. This is significant when answering the vexing question of whether the leader of government business, the senator in charge of arranging the business of the Senate, since it is the government which does this, must be a minister. 9. That being said, it is necessary to examine how the primary business of the government is effected in the Senate and whether this will necessitate the senator who is in charge of arranging the business of the Senate, the leader of government business, to be a minister of government. 10. The primary business of the Senate is effected through bills, motions, petitions, resolutions, or papers. The Constitution is largely silent on the procedure and proceedings of the Senate. However, by Section 70, subsection 1 of the Constitution, standing orders for the regulations and orderly conduct of the Senate proceedings can be made by the Senate. But there is a caveat on this power of the Senate. The standing orders which are made are subject to the Constitution. In other words, the standing orders cannot operate in conflict with the Constitution, for it is to be recalled by edict of Section 2, such a standing order would be void. Thus, the standing orders must be read subject to the clear edict of the Constitution. And as set out above under discussion of the Constitution, there is nothing in it which proclaims and mandates that the leader of government business must be a minister. 11. Looking at the standing orders. In the Senate standing orders, which were promulgated on 15 July 1967, there is no provision that requires a minister to be appointed to the Senate, or that a minister be appointed leader of government business in the Senate. To the contrary, there are multiple provisions in the standing order which makes clear that office of a minister and leader of government business are distinct and separate. In Standing Order 9, subsection 2, for example, which deals with days of meeting, a minister or the senator responsible for government business can move on the adjournment that the Senate meet on a day earlier than the day the Senate stands adjourned. Similarly, in Standing Order 10, subsection 5, which deals with hours of sitting, a minister or senator in charge of arranging the business of the Senate shall direct the day when opposed business shall be dealt with. So too, by Standing Order 10, subsection 6, it is a minister or a senator responsible for government business who can move the adjournment of the Senate before 4:30 o'clock. So too, by Standing Order 10, subsection 8, it is the minister or the senator responsible for government business who may, without notice, move that the proceedings on any specified business may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour, though opposed. Similarly, by Standing Order 11, subsection 1, it is a minister or the senator in charge of government business who may move the adjournment of the Senate. And it is of significance to note, by Standing Order 11, subsection 2, on the adjournment, any matter for which cabinet is responsible may be raised, and any senator to whom responsibility has been delegated by the minister may reply. As Section 3 of the Interpretation Act makes plain, the preposition or shall be construed disjunctively and not as implying similarity. In other words, by use of the preposition or, it is intended to make plain that the two things referred to are separate and distinct. 13. The above thus illustrates that 1. The office of a minister and leader of government business are separate and distinct, and that 2. Any matter for which Cabinet is responsible can be addressed in the Senate, even though none of the senators are ministers. It follows that the standing orders clearly do not require that the leader of government business must be a minister. The same conclusion is arrived at, it is submitted, when an examination is also done on bills, motions, petitions, resolutions, or papers which are measures through which the primary business of the Senate are effected. This will require further examination of the standing orders, bills. The procedure for introduction and first reading of bills are set out in Standing Order 48. Any senator may, with leave of the Senate, introduce a bill so long as he has given notice of an intention to introduce the bill. Further, a bill may be presented on behalf of the government after notice without an order of the Senate for its introduction. As a reading of Standing Order 48 makes clear then, there is no requirement that a bill must be presented by the leader of government business in the Senate. The converse is also true. A bill may be presented by the leader of government business in the Senate, whether he is a minister or not. Motions and petitions. 15. The Senate can only consider money bills, motions, and petitions on the recommendation or with the consent of the Cabinet to be signified by a minister and recorded in the minutes of the proceedings of the Senate. The convention is that this is routinely done by letter sent to the Senate by the Minister of Finance. This again rubbishes the argument that at least one government senator must be a minister or that the leader of government business must be a minister. 16. Further, there is no provision in the standing orders that requires a minister or leader of government business to move motions or petitions. As mentioned above, petitions dealing with monies can only be considered on the recommendation or with the consent of the Cabinet, signified by a minister or the senator responsible for government business. And this by convention has been routinely done by letter sent to the Senate, of which I have seen to validate this. Resolutions. Resolutions are referred to 7 times in the standing orders, and there is no requirement for the leader of government business in the Senate or a minister to move a resolution. Papers. By Standing Order 15, subsection 1, papers can be presented to the Senate by a minister or the senator in charge of government business. As explained above, the use of the preposition or signifies that this can be done by either of the 2 office holders and not that it can only be done by a minister. 19. A careful review of the Constitution and the standing orders therefore show there is no need for the leader of government business in the Senate to be a minister or member of Cabinet. The standing orders make a distinction between a minister and a senator in charge of government business. Bills, motions, petitions, resolutions, or papers may be presented by the senator in charge of government business and considered by the Senate, even where such senator is not a minister. 20. In the public debate on this issue, reference has been made to Standing Order 21 in support of the argument that public bills can only be presented by a minister. This is incorrect. Standing Order 21 is entitled Arrangement of Public Business and sets out the order in which public business is to be considered by the Senate. It also defines public business to mean motion proposed on public bills. Government business is defined as motions proposed to be made and bills sponsored by ministers. It goes on to provide that government business shall be set down in such order as the government think fit. Standing Order 21 is procedural and simply describes the order in which public and private business of the Senate is to be considered, public business is to take precedent. 23. The standing orders do not expressly define public bills. However, it can be inferred as private bills are defined as, quote, any bill not being a government measure which, in the opinion of the President, appears to affect directly private rights or property. The test is whether the bill is a government measure, that is, it is not intended to affect or benefit some particular person, association, or corporate body. 24. It is to be recalled that pursuant to Standing Order 48, bills may be presented to the Senate on behalf of the government by any senator. Once these bills are not private bills, they will take precedent over other business. 25. Therefore, in my considered opinion, a thorough review of the Constitution and the Senate standing orders show that there is no requirement that the leader of the government business must be a minister of government. I take this opportunity to thank Senator Michael Perry-Feet for raising the issue. It gives us in the Senate an opportunity to share with the populace an element of our governance system, and particularly a segment of how the Senate conducts the business of the people. It is also an opportune moment, considering the ongoing exercise to review the Constitution of Belize and our own exercise, of which Senator Michael Perry-Feet is a member of our Standing Orders Committee to review our standing orders. So, Senator Perry-Feet, I do thank you for raising the issue, and I am hopeful that it puts that issue to rest.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Happy New Year to all the senators and to the President and the members of staff of the National Assembly. And I welcome Senator Swaso, Senator Castillo back to this honorable chamber. Madam President, you will allow me just to say that the notion and the history will show that Senator Douglas Singh, Senator Alfredo Martinez, and Senator Dickie Bradley served as leaders of government business in the Senate without being members of cabinet or ministers. First term, he was not. Madam President, I rise to take charge of the following bills: Summary Jurisdiction Offences Amendment Bill 2023, Criminal Code Amendment Number 2 Bill 2023, National Accreditation Council Bill Amendment Bill 2023, Education and Training Amendment Bill 2023, National Women's Commission Bill 2023, Families and Children Amendment Bill 2023, Harbors and Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2023, and the Private Security and Investigation Services Control Amendment Bill 2024. Madam President, the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Amendment Bill and the Criminal Code Amendment Bill basically deal with a very similar subject. With your leave, I would wish to deal with them together. In accordance with Standing Order Number 49-1, I move that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith.
Honorable members, the question is that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Papers.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to lay on the table sessional papers number 77/1/14, Central Bank of Belize, Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for Fiscal Year 2024, number 78/1/14, Ministry of Infrastructure Development and Housing Contract Agreement, Municipal Infrastructure Development, San Ignacio, Santa Elena, November 2023.
Honorable members, those papers are ordered to lie on the table.
Motion relating to the business or sitting of the Senate.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I move that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President.
Honorable members, the question is that at its rising today, the Senate adjourns to a date to be fixed by the President. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Public business, government business, motion.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I move that whereas the government of Belize is a party to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is also known as the Treaty of Tlatelolco, and whereas Resolution 268/12, amending paragraph 2 of the Article 25 of the treaty, was adopted in Mexico City on the 10th May 1991 by the General Conference of the Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean. And whereas the amendment to paragraph 2 of Article 25 of the treaty aims to facilitate the accession of independent states to the said treaty, provided that they are situated in the geographical zone of application of the said treaty and were members of the United Nations as of December 10, 1985. And whereas the amendment to paragraph 2 of Article 25 of the treaty also aims to facilitate the accession of non-autonomous territories that were listed in document OAS/CERP AG/DOC 1939/85 of November 5, 1985, when they attained their independence. And whereas the government of Belize is desirous of ratifying the amendment to paragraph 2 of Article 25 of the treaty, and whereas Section 61A(2)(a) of the Belize Constitution provides that the Senate has the power to authorize the ratification, including the adhesion or accession of any treaty by the government of Belize, now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable Senate authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the amendment to paragraph 2 of Article 25 of the Treaty of Tlatelolco, a full text of which is hereto annexed.
Honorable members, that motion is referred to the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee for examination, consideration, and report.
Bills for second reading.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, may I have your leave to deal with the next two bills together?
Yes, you so do.
Much obliged. Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, Chapter 98 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to upgrade the use of threatening words or behavior from a petty offense to a serious offense, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the definition of aggravated assault, to rationalize and increase the penalty for threat of death and similar character offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, members of the Senate, these two bills are very short. They seek to provide stronger sentences and upgrading of the offenses where people seek to interfere with the performance of duties by members of the public service, police officers, etc.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfit.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as we look at half of the bill, well, half of the, you look at the Criminal Code bill, Madam President, I don't see how anybody could have any issue with that part of the bill from the House. I mean, if you have people who want to assault or threaten public officers, any public officer, any peace officer, anybody in charge of security or safety, if you want to assault them, use threatening words, threaten to kill them, police everybody. Madam President, if you do that, you should go to jail. You shouldn't do that. So that part of the bill, Madam President, to make that more robust, to make the penalties harsher, in that aspect, is not an issue for me. However, Madam President, I have great issue with the summary jurisdiction amendment. If you read it carefully, Madam President, what this is saying, pretty much, is that I don't even have to threaten a public officer. I don't even have to threaten a peace officer. All that peace officer has to do is determine that what I say, as well in my own yard, amongst my friends drinking rum, that I can go to jail for that. And that, Madam President, is what I find completely and utterly unacceptable. Madam President, it says any person who uses, and I'm reading from the new section 4A, any person who uses any threatening, okay, fine, abusive, okay, profane, obscene, and this is where you really lose me, indecent, because then, Madam President, who defines indecent? What might be indecent for you might not be indecent for me, especially if I'm in my home, if I'm in my yard. Whether calculated to lead to a breach of peace or not. So if I'm using indecent language, I don't even have to be threatening the officers listed here. I don't even have to be threatening them. They could just be in their presence, or I could just be in their presence rather. They're on duty, pass my house, hear me in my yard using what they interpret to be indecent language, and I can go to jail for 3 years for that. Madam President, I don't know about the public, but I cuss bad word. I cuss a lot of bad word privately with my friends, and when we're hanging out and we talk, one lot of things might be interpreted as indecent in a friendly environment. You can go to jail for that. No, Madam President. So, this is what it's saying. Such several offenses being committed in a street or public place or in a private enclosure or ground, whether directly or within the hearing of the list elected official. I think they're accustomed to hearing things indecent, Madam President. Commits an offense. I don't want to belabor the point, Madam President. I don't want to make light of it. But what this law is saying is if I'm having a barbecue in my yard and a police officer or somebody else on duty is patrolling my area, and we the talk, and we the cuss bad word, and we the hang out, and we the talk, if we are, the policeman hears that. Because it says whether or not my indecent or obscene words are calculated to cause a breach of the peace or not. So it's not like I'm in my yard, and me and another person are fighting or cursing each other about to start. No, it's not like that. Whether to cause a breach of peace or not, which means it could be a completely friendly environment, a completely peaceful environment, but hey, I just passed your yard. I hear on the course. No, man, you under arrest because that's very indecent what you just said. Madam President, it comes down to that, the way this is written. The way this is written, it comes down to that. And that, Madam President, is unacceptable. You better lock up me now. You better lock up half of Belize now. Because all of we went with the home, with privacy, we're home. And with the party and with the shout. We all say things that may not be decent to other people. So then, everybody going to jail then? Everybody could go to jail for 3 years? No, Madam President. No. If you want to pass a law that says you threaten a police officer, you assault a police officer, oh, go to jail for 20 years. No problem, because you shouldn't do that. But no, you're legislating morality in my yard. You're telling me what I can say in my yard, even if I'm not doing something that's going to breach the peace. Come on, man. You know, check anything here before who conceptualize these things? Who does these things? So, Madam President, that part I cannot support. The other part, where you're going to increase the penalties for assaulting officers, that I support. And that's my contribution, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Does it? Okay, yeah, thanks. Madam President, I'll be very brief. In reviewing the Criminal Code Amendment Bill as well as the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Amendment Bill, Madam President, I certainly support the direction in which they're going in terms of holding people accountable for assaulting or abusing persons who are doing their duties, especially carrying out in important functions such as teachers, policemen, persons in the judiciary. One thing, though, that struck me in reviewing them is that I noticed that at the last bullet point of 2 of the Criminal Code and 11, Roman numeral 11 on the summary jurisdiction offenses, they talk about an elected official. And I imagine that the intention here was to include those in persons who are ministers carrying out their functions. But you will note that senators are not elected, and that senators are not elected. And in fact, in the past several terms, we've had several ministers of police from the Senate, and I think they would fall into this category. I don't know if that was an oversight or perhaps there's an explanation for it, but I'd like to bring that to your attention. I also feel, Madam President, that perhaps we should have also taken the opportunity, since we also have several education bills in front of us. I think some of our students who go to school suffer tremendous abuse on the streets by persons, by adults, and I'm talking about students underage. Perhaps they should have been a category that would that should have been considered in this bill. I think that we see it all the time, we hear about it all the time. Minors being abused on their way to school by adults, in many cases men. And I think that's certainly an area I think that we maybe could have included in here to try to address that. As well, Madam President, looking at the vulnerable again, the elderly, I think, face quite a bit of abuse. And I know that the purpose of the bill is to look at categories of persons who are performing important duties and functions on behalf of the state. But those are two vulnerable groups that I think certainly need more protection, and perhaps we, if not in this bill, perhaps in the near term, we should look at them. I think education is so key in this country that we should try to protect those who are, like teachers, who are carrying out the functions of imparting the knowledge, but also for the future of this country in terms of the students. I think we need to protect them a lot more than we're doing right now. And I know that they go through a tremendous amount of abuse on their way to and from school. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chinona.
Good morning. And I will also take this opportunity to wish everyone a Happy New Year and to welcome our colleagues, Mr. Suazo. I know you'll make waves today. and Mr. Castillo. Welcome back. Madam President, I thank my colleague for raising the reality that students live every day, but I do want to signal it's not isolated to students. I think, speaking now for my gender, that it is also a reality that women have to deal with every day. So we fully support the direction of this bill, but call out that I don't know if this is perhaps the open and shut to it, and I know we have some other pieces of legislation in the works, but certainly we would signal that sexual harassment as a whole, which does not exist currently, should definitely be treated with the seriousness that it deserves. And I think, as was stated earlier, it is also critically important to define what is meant by terms, because what I may consider sexual harassment is not necessarily what others will consider sexual harassment, and what is indecent and what is culturally tolerated, if not encouraged behavior, is so intrinsic sometimes we lose sight of what that is, and that becomes blurred. So we would certainly align ourselves with the comments, the recommendations, that if we're going to get to this level, that it has to be categorically clear to everyone that we know exactly what we're talking about. I don't think any of us feel good to be on Albert Street and to be hearing somebody shouting all sorts of bad words, as we say culturally, the language that has become so insidious. But similarly, it is that we see nakedness in our streets. Nobody's talking about that as being indecent, and how do we as a society address that and make sure that we can create the society that we want to see for ourselves. So along with the behavior of, as we say, the bad behavior that we don't want to encourage, we also have to be looking at this holistically. So we support the direction of the bill, but would seek, in the abundance of caution, particularly given the penalties, that we be very, very clear on what we're talking about, and that we be inclusive. Because if we get into this conversation, Madam President, of who all should deserve protection, we can also talk about sexual minorities and the victimization that they face and have to live with, and mitigate their behavior around, just so that they can get to their jobs or get to their wherever they're headed to safely and without feeling like they're being threatened on a daily basis. So this opens up a conversation, and I'm grateful that it puts this at the fore, and we can begin to talk about these things the way they should be talked about. But it's also calling out that it's really a much broader issue that we need to address meaningfully. And I would lastly like to share that we also flagged the elected official limitation. While from our respective zones we are elected from our peers, I think it's also that as leaders of organizations and social partners, some of our NGOs in this country have been targeted for their work, for their petitions, for handing out prophylactics, for taking certain positions on it, that it is also that we should be looking at how do we make sure public participation is not limited again because of threatening and insulting behavior in a meaningful way, given the importance of the contributions to this country. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Elena Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, and welcome to our colleagues this morning. Madam President, the NTUCB has a few concerns regarding this bill before us. And while, as everyone has said, I support the comments made by my colleagues, we feel that we are moving away somewhat from using or requiring proof for some of these things when we are looking at, for example, you can be held accountable if I hear that you say something or you say a bad word, as we call it, just by those persons, indicating that they heard me say these things. That can be problematic for me as an individual. That is the view of the NTUCB in terms of reviewing this bill before us, and we feel that while we understand the purpose of the bill and while it is that we want to ensure that we are not encouraging our citizens, threatening others and doing all of these sorts of things, we have to be very careful that putting this portion in here is not going to affect people's right in terms of your right to freedom of speech. And that's a huge concern for us that we share as it relates to this bill. Again, Madam President, we do understand that we want to have a society that is disciplined, that has certain behavior, but there's a thin line here when we include these words such as, whether directly or within hearing, that may create mischief. Because, for example, we were discussing that, let's say, for example, a police officer were to, hold you for something, in the process of arresting you for something, and maybe somebody else is shouting at you or telling you something while you are being transported, and you may utter profanity. Might not be to the officer or about the officer, but it might be just that you're speaking to the other person who might be around. The NTUCB feels that can create some unnecessary issues, and so I think, again, the essence of what is here is supported. However, I think that this portion of this bill will create some issues in terms of people's freedom and people's rights. And so I don't know how we can look at that. In relation to the categories listed, yes, we do support those. I'm not sure about the elected official, because that's another matter again. How we view that and what it is that we are trying to, is it that we can no longer say certain things to elected officials, when we feel that they are not doing what they ought to be doing, because you have to be very careful what you say and how you say things, because you can be in trouble as well, right? And it's not just, we're going to be charged something, right? It's conviction to imprisonment for 3 years. So as union leaders, we all know that we are often in this back and forth, especially with government officials. And sometimes things do get heated. And if it is that, with Tyra Miss Smith, they put me to shame, and Miss Smith putting things out there about us as a union leader, we'll deal with her now to utter these words. And I heard you say these things, so let's go. 3 years imprisonment, you can't do any more union function. So those are the concerns that we have, and we are to ensure that, in putting things in place, we don't infringe on our rights as Belizeans, as given to us by our Constitution. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, I would seek first of all to respond to the concerns, because whilst I appreciate that they are legitimate concerns, I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the piece of legislation. It is important, first of all, to look at what the law says now, prior to the amendment. It says, this is Section 4 of the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, a person who uses to or at any other person or in the hearing of any person any threatening, abusive, profane, obscene, indecent, or insulting words or behavior, whether calculated to lead to a breach of the peace or not, such several offenses being committed in a street or public place or in a private enclosure or ground is guilty of an offense. The law today says if you use to any person, in the hearing of any person, any threatening, abusive, profane, obscene, indecent, insulting words or behavior, whether calculated to lead to a breach of the peace or not, such several offenses being committed in a street or public place or in a private enclosure or ground is guilty of an offense. What Senator Perry-Feet described, his example of having a barbecue, drinking with his friends, behaving the way he usually behaves, he would be guilty of an offense today. Now let us look at what the bill proposes to do, Madam President. It says, first of all, we are going to repeal the provision that I just read. Now look at what the proposal says. A person who uses any threatening, abusive, profane, obscene, indecent, or insulting words or behavior, which is what is in the law at the moment, whether calculated to lead to a breach of the peace or not, which is in the law at the present, such several offenses being committed in a street or public place or in a private enclosure or ground, which is what is in the law at the moment, whether directly or within the hearing of. Now recall what I read. The law as it stands today does not have any category, does not have any class. It says anybody who do them things and anybody hear it, anywhere, it's an offense. There is now these limiting words. If you do it within the hearing of a person acting as a judicial officer and legal officer or a peace officer. So, it has to be not a police officer walking down the road. He has to be performing his functions. And this happens. Then, an offense is committed. And look at the rest of them. A member of the Belize Defense Force in the course of his duty. Coast Guard in the course of his duty. Immigration officer in the course of his duty. And it continues. Custom officer, National Fire Service, public officer, prison officer, teacher, member of the media, and then we can discuss elected officials. So, this is limiting the provision that is on the books today and saying when these public officers, whether they be police, BDF, Coast Guard, a judge, etc., are performing their functions, it is an offense to hurl offensive, abusive, insulting words or to conduct yourself in such a way. It is seeking to address a problem, a mischief that we have, where immigration officers or police officers conduct searches and they are being abused by people in the course of their duty, not walking down when you're having a barbecue. And so, Madam President, I want to say to honorable senators that this is reducing the scope of what is actually on the books of the law books of the country today. It is only applicable where the person is in the course of his or her duty. It is absolutely essential. The complaints from these officers are many. The abuse they receive when they are performing their functions. In relation to 11, an elected official, I am entirely open to having a discussion in the committee of the whole Senate when this bill is being considered as to whether members think it should include senators or to be removed at all. Other than that, Madam President, I commend the bill to the Senate and ask that the question be put.
Honourable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, Chapter 9(8) of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to upgrade the use of threatening words or behavior from a petty offence to a serious offence and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the definition of aggravated assault to rationalize and increase the penalty for threat of death and similar character offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. The ayes have it for both the summary jurisdiction offenses Amendment Bill 2023 and the Criminal Code Amendment Number 2 Bill 2023.
Bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Offense Act, Chapter 98 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to upgrade the use of threatening words or behavior from a petty offense to a serious offense, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. A bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the definition of aggravated assault to rationalize and increase the penalties for threat of death and similar character offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the National Accreditation Council of Belize Act, Chapter 3901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the registration of institutions and providers within the Council, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, the bill is very short. It has just one clause, and it says that notwithstanding subsection 1, any institution or provider that has previously been granted, any institution or provider that wishes to operate in Belize shall register. And if you are already registered for 2023, you shall be allowed to continue to operate without registering until 2025. And any institution or provider that wishes to undertake or advertise to the public any new course or program shall obtain the prior approval of the Council. It simply seeks, Madam President, to ensure that all institutions are registered with the Council and that any new courses are approved by the Council. Senator Chanona has raised a question. I have referred her to CEO Mejia from the Ministry of Education. Hopefully she'll be able to clarify it for her.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chanona.
Thank you, Madam President. And yes, thanks to Leader of Government Business for the direction. Just to share, the clarification is just what is meant by operating, so that if a university has recruiting officers, an office in Belize that is not for a local, is that classified as operating? Will they have to register with the Council? If they want to advertise locally and promote their institution, will that have to be a registration? So just to share the levels, but I have been in touch with CEO Mejia this morning and others from the ministry so that we will get the clarification that's required there. Thank you.
Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the National Accreditation Council of Belize Act, Chapter 3901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the registration of institutions and providers with the Council, and to provide for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the National Accreditation Council of Belize Act, Chapter 3901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the registration of institutions and providers with the Council, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Education and Training Act, Chapter 3601 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to increase the age of compulsory education of a child and to provide for mothers communicate therewith or incidental thereto. Again, Madam President, even though the bill is very short, it is a critically important piece of legislation and a move in the right direction, lifting the age for compulsory education from 14 to 16.
One, I would like to say.
Can I recognize you first? I know you're eager, so I do recognize Senator Joel Swazo.
All right, good day, everyone. Happy New Year's. This amendment, from our side, we welcome it because as a developing nation such as Belize, these changes are needed, especially if we want to build a great foundation for education, right? We need to increase the captured audience that we can use through the education system to get them into schools. However, I would like the government to take into consideration various things before we move forward with this great effort. It needs to be pushed forward. What has the government taken into consideration the additional resources that are needed to ensure that this is effective and that we are able to capture these students that we now have? We have to take into consideration that we do not have enough schools. We have dilapidated schools. We do not have sufficient teachers. We need now new psychosocial support for these additional students that will be in these classrooms. I will refer you all to a situation that I experienced where they have a 15-year-old student in primary school. Now, that child requires additional psychosocial support that our primary school structures cannot provide at this time. What investment or what budgetary allocation will be made to ensure that these psychosocial supports are provided within our primary school system and also in our high school system for these additional students that will be mandatorily required to be in school? What will we do to ensure that we have that enough resources and that the personnel and the capacities within our schools to ensure that, yes, we're going to capture more students, but what else will we contribute to this effort to ensure that it's effective and that we build an effective education system with the additional support needed? Another thing that I think the government needs to take into consideration is our limited truancy. Yes, indeed, we are saying that we have mandatory age, but however, when it was 14, our truancy efforts are limited as well. We have limited truancy officers within each district. So in terms of each district, you probably have 2,000 students. Imagine 3 truancy officers being responsible for 2,000 students. And taking into consideration that we have still not returned to pre-COVID levels in terms of students returning to school. We still not have returned back to that. So we still have not been effective within our truancy management for when the Act read that it was 14 years old. So what now will we put in place to ensure that proper truancy is enforced within our districts and within our country to ensure that students do go back to school? Also, when will this competency-based curriculum that require resources be effective and implemented? So we are now moving to increase our captured audience to 16 years old. When now will we have additional resources again to ensure that this competency-based curriculum now take into consideration this new population that will be in school mandatorily? What will we do to ensure that we have resources? Again, it comes back to resources that are required to ensure that these schools function with the limited resources that they have and with this additional policy that is now being created. Next, I would like to highlight our teachers still though. I would like to say grateful to them for they are the one that keep most of our classroom funded in terms of charts, in terms of chalk, in terms of water. The parents as well, when they have to send letters home to these parents to donate Clorox, to donate toilet paper, and so on and so forth. Now, again, we're increasing the population within our schools. Who will take up the responsibility of these costs? Will it be the parents? Will it be the state? Will it be teachers or will it be an NGO? So that is my question, and also we have to reference the fact that now we have a priority area in terms of education that is now being burdened with additional students are being added, which is good. However, now we have a minister that will be responsible for another ministry when we need his full focus now with this new additional policy that is being created and this amendment to our law. So with that said, in conclusion, thanks for hearing me out, and we look forward to hearing from the other side about this. Thanks.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I think this bill is an important step in the right direction. I completely believe that we should push to more and higher education. Our problem continues to be that people are dropping out of the education system much too early. And certainly I believe that when we see that type of thing happening, I think the state has a responsibility to act. And I take Senator Suazo's point with respect to the identification of additional resources, but I think that's something that can be looked into. The important thing is that once you have the idea, then you look at resources to back up that policy or idea. And so I think that's certainly something I think we can work on, and I agree, it will require additional resources. Madam President, while I think that it is a step in the right direction, I still don't think that we're going far enough with respect to this very important issue of higher education and getting our students to stay in school longer. I'll just look at a couple statistics that I was able to research. The graduation rate for high school students in Belize, according to a World Bank 2020 report, and all these statistics will be based on that report, is 45 to 55% graduation rate for high schools. Again, this is a little outdated because it's from 2020, but I'm sharing it with you because that's the only one I've been able to see. If you compare that to countries like Barbados, it's 90.8%. In Jamaica, it's 62.7%. Trinidad is 72.5%. So if you look at if you isolate just the high school part of it, Madam President, you'll see that we're lagging behind our Caribbean neighbors. And it's certainly something I think that we can look into in terms of trying to improve. If you look at it from a tertiary standpoint, about 7.9% of the population, again, according to the 2020 World Bank report, population has a college degree. If we compare that to the Caribbean again, Barbados is 32.2%, Guyana is 11.4%, Jamaica 18%, Trinidad and Tobago 28.2%. The only country we're ahead of is Haiti at 2.7%. Madam President, I quoted these figures simply because I think that we need to set targets. While we want to keep persons in school a little longer, I'm still hoping to see targets such as for example, at year 30, that perhaps we could raise those statistics from 7.9% of college graduation rate of college graduates in the population to perhaps 10% or 12% or whatever it is. Similarly for high school, raising those rates. I think that if we set those targets, then I think that we can set up a whole program and identify the resources necessary to achieve those targets. I think that the longer we leave it hanging out there without specifically going after specifics in education, I think that we will continue to lag behind our neighbors. As you know, the entire world economy now is based on information, is based on technology, is knowledge-based. And so the quicker we can raise those tertiary education rates, I think the better we will be able to cope with the challenges that this new era brings. And so, while I support the bill wholeheartedly, but I think that we still need to go much further than this. I would want to see us set specific targets in education so that we can improve from where we are right now. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Elena Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. The NTUCB, once more, Madam President, is applauding this effort. We believe that moving the age from 14 to 16 is good. It's good for the country because we are looking at ensuring that more of our students or more of our population has a certain level of education that they can function well in society. And that is always a good thing because we want our people to be, educated. However, these things do come with setbacks. As a teacher of 38 years, I understand and I have seen where we have students who remain in our primary school system, for example, for longer than they should. So if we have that the primary school age would be 14, at 14 the child, we don't have to keep the child in school anymore. We do have a few students who are older than 14 in the primary school system. These students are mostly students who are not particularly academically inclined. They prefer to do other things. So they may be bright in other areas, but those areas we don't cater for. And so while we focus more on academics, these students remain in school and they get old in a class because they are not able to do the work, or some of them just don't have interest. They prefer to do other things, and so they don't put interest in the work, and they remain in the school system for longer than the age that is given. With this bill, Madam President, we have to pay attention to what we are going to be putting in place for these students, for these children. And Senator Suazo raised these concerns because it has to do with resources. So if I want my students to remain in school up to the age of 16, I want for them to have certain skills, or at least certain level of skills that they can function. But I have these children who are not inclined to do math and language and these other subject areas where they prefer skills, they prefer trade. Where do we put them? Are we prepared, or do we have the space, for example, at the IT vets? Do we have additional areas where these students can go into? Because it's not just about having them in school to a certain age, but it's ensuring that they are not only performing in school, but that what they are doing will be beneficial for them and that we are providing that to them. Senator Herrera raised the concern regarding the statistics. We hear that of our primary school students who move on to secondary school, it's a very small, and I'm saying small because it's not, for us it's not good enough. So if you have 50% or 60% of your students who leave primary school going to high school, that we need to increase that number. But we will only be able to increase those numbers if we provide these other options for our students. So in our discussion, we were given the example of a child who is in primary school. The child is going to be, I think, 16, but the child is more inclined to something like, he wants to be a chef, but we don't offer that anymore. In my younger days, when we used to go to school, we used to do things like macrame and sewing and all of those things that enabled us that if you were not academically inclined, you could do those things and you could still make a living. I think those are the things that we want to get back to so that we ensure that these children are engaged in things that will be beneficial not only to them, their families, but society as well. So resources are critical in terms of being able to keep these children in school, and not just keeping them just to be there, but ensuring that they are performing. I'm aware that and I will use the word was because I'm not sure where we are with that, that there was this boost program where, as far as I understand, families were given incentives for having their children go to school. So if your child went to school every day, attended school regularly, you would be given this incentive for that. We probably have to pay attention to that, and maybe, and as I said, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance in terms of all that this program does. But as opposed to just giving an incentive for attendance, maybe we should now look at giving the incentive for attendance and performance. So not just that as a family you send your child to school and the child is there every day, but that the child progresses, that the child performs, that the child is doing well in whatever area he or she chooses to go, that the child is performing. And then when we look at our new curriculum, the competency-based curriculum, which now is more gearing our children towards doing a lot of things, hands-on and being involved and seeing and connecting real-life situations within the classroom. What it is that you are learning should be used to show how you're going to be using those things in real life. And so it has areas where the school can in some way provide certain programs for children. So the school-based programs are there, that it provides for that. But that again would require resources, and we all know that many of our schools are unable to provide these resources. So while we have certain things in place that would allow for our children to be meaningfully engaged, there is still more support that is needed. And so we trust from our end, and myself being a teacher, that as we move towards this age of 16, that the required resources will be provided as soon as possible, so that those children, when we keep them beyond the 14, they have somewhere that they can go, that they will be productive citizens. So once more, Madam President, we applaud this move from the government, but we just want to reiterate that it comes not just with this bill changing the age, but there are several other things that must be put in place to ensure that it does what it is that the government is expecting and what we expect this to do by having our students in school much longer than the age of 14. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chanona.
Thank you, Madam President. I think it must be called out. Resources are never enough. And I think it's been tradition that the education efforts in this country has always benefited from the greatest allocation from the national budget every year. But I will say that whatever resources we can allocate to education, to meaningful education directed to productivity, is money well spent. And I think that has been supported throughout. And I do want to acknowledge publicly the government's call out to the international communities, to the IFI, that education is a priority for Belize. And I know through the Millennium Challenge Corporation work and partnership that education will be a key priority that will get much needed comprehensive review and benefit. And I think that is to be credited. It should be, that is the priority. And I know that every effort will be made there to make sure that those monies, that injection of capital will, as Senator Elena has put it, produce the dividends that the investment will allocate. But, Madam President, I do want to share, recently we've been involved in some parliamentary training sessions, and it was called out to us that there are more than one, but one is enough, incidents that the authorities are aware of where particularly female students are being forced into situations in order to meet the price of their education. And when I say situations, these are high school students for various reasons, being forced by family members to engage in sexual activity with grown men, adult men, in order to go to school, to meet the costs of school. And that is a steep price for education. It shows that the students want to go to school and are willing to pay those kinds of prices to go to school. And I think that is a sobering reality, that over and beyond, as I said, every effort to make education as free as possible, there are still costs related to going to school that families are saying, whether totally true or not, but that families are telling their children, I can't afford to send all I want to school, I can't afford to send you to school, and in order to go to school, you have to go with Mr. So-and-so, and otherwise. So we do want to call out that there are some realities around this, but again, I think it's good conversation. It's conversation that needs to be had so that when we're talking about education, it is being in school, yes, but being in school in a way that you can associate positively with going to school. And I do want to also publicly acknowledge all the NGOs and civil society actors that are working on their own volition, many times without gratitude, for the feeding programs across this country. The parents who give of their time, everybody who shows up to help kids get something in their bellies so that they can concentrate and they're not worried about somebody else hearing the noises that their stomachs are making. I know that brings in a whole slew, that's a much bigger conversation, but when we're talking about education, all of these layers of complexity come into play, and we do need to acknowledge it and begin to work at it, and that's why I started out at the outset, Madam President, that we are, I think, moving in the right direction, and we have partners that want to support Belize in her priority to get education sorted, because, as Senator Herrera called out, that opens up the world to us. If we don't have educated people, we don't have that. And we know that every time we get education, our students soar, our students win competitions globally, our students do things that maybe we didn't even factor in, robotics, everything that we put our hands on, that we get the support and we get that dynamism in there, we do really well at it. And nationally, that bodes well for all of us, because people will do what they have to survive, and we want to make sure that they can do that with dignity and with pride. So we do support this effort of making sure that our children stay in school longer, are in the best position, but we do call out that we are here. We want to support in the efforts to make sure that the transition from preschool to primary school to high school is meaningful, and that we set up the support system around that so that kids can stay in school and they can do well in school. So we look forward to everything that lies ahead for education. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Antonio Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning to everybody. Mr. Suazo, Senator, welcome. And obviously I need to welcome my brother and schoolmate from Corozal, Linsford Castillo. Welcome back, my brother. Madam President, as today we come to debate this very, very important bill. It's very important. However, as we've been hearing, it will have implications, it will have setbacks, but we collectively have to play a role in education. Education is key. It's the gateway of success in this country. If we cannot be educated, we'll never be anybody in this country, because that's the only way out. However, by moving the age from 14 to 16, we applaud that. It could be to 18. But what matters here, Madam President, are the resources, the systems, the incentives for these kids to stay in school. And while listening to my colleagues here debating this topic, something came to mind, because I have to relate to the area where I come from. Every area has different dynamics. The rural has different dynamics than the urban. The south, the north, every area is unique to their own way of education, Madam President. So therefore, in our area, we have 3 high schools, which is the Belize Adventist High School, we have the Sartaneja Baptist, and the Chunush St. Viator's. The dropout rate is alarming. One, what I listen here, was those parallel to the legal working age, the labor age, Madam President, because we're lifting here from 14 to 16, yet we are remaining with the labor law as a consent to be 14 to be able to work in the workforce. So now it will be difficult to keep these students at 16 when they don't have the resources to go to high school. They will drop out and they can work. How do you keep them in school? What are the chances or what are the methods or the assistance that we will give these students? So to me, the age really doesn't matter. What matters is the methods, is the structure that we need to put to keep these kids in school. I want to share one particular story. While in Chunush, I met this young lady by the name of Siomeri Huchin. She graduated from Standard 6 at the age of 12. But her parents had to make that tough decision as to who to send to school. Mind you, the tuition for First Farm in St. Viator is only 550. We can say only 550, but to them it's more than 550 because it takes uniforms, books, and also their little pocket money so they can eat. Senator Chanona said it really. There's incredible humming of bellies in these schools because kids that go to school without eating. So therefore, this young lady couldn't go to primary school because there's another unfortunate situation in the rural areas, Madam President, that the women, the girls, are deemed to be made housewives. It's still there. It's sad. It's unfortunate. So they sent the brother and not her. But listen to what happened here, Madam President. 7 years later, at the age of 19, she still believed in education. She still kept her dream alive of wanting to break the chains of poverty. So she went to register her little brother. And there was an angel sent there. The principal of St. Viator's identified who this young lady was and what was her potential. And he offered her a full scholarship by the mission. And this is where I want to go. A full scholarship, which meant tuition, books, uniform, and even a monthly stipend so that she can make it to school. Madam President, I was fortunate to be on that commencement exercise when she graduated at the age of 22. And not only graduated, she became the valedictorian of that class. So what I'm trying to say, Madam President, is that the age does not really matter. It's how we equip our kids to go to school. One sad note about this whole story is that 4 or 5 months before she graduated, her father passed away. So she couldn't make her father proud. But she made a whole community proud. And her story is an inspiration story and it's deemed to be recognized. 22 years. 7 years she stayed at home because they simply could not afford sending her to high school. Today, and I have one more young lady by the name of Elcira Jones. She graduated at the age of 25. Both young ladies are pursuing degrees as we speak because they were afforded the opportunity. It's not only about the age. Let's lift up the age to 16, 17, 18. It's what we put to keep them in school. I spoke to both principals from the schools. The dropout rate is why? Because when they reach second, third farm, they can go to dive. Because most of these communities do fishing. So at that age, they can get their license and they go dive. So they see money, they don't come back to school. So what they have to do? They have to help the siblings coming behind. That's the tradition. But if we not only increase the age to 16, but we give them the tools and the opportunity, the assistance that these kids need, I'm pretty sure that we will have a better Belize. I can speak, like I said, in the rural areas, because this is where that problem is seen. The enrollment of Sartaneja Baptist School is 84 students. 84 students. That's in St. Catherine's, is about 35 to one form, to one class, one 1, 2, whatever, right? And then you have the Trinidad St. Viator's, the enrollment is 184 students to date. We are failing the system. We can do better, not only by increasing the age, Madam President, but we must put systems. We must give assistance to these schools. Education is not free in these areas. So, as I commend the government for that initiative, which is a very good initiative, education, I will say it is the only way out. And coming, as my brother can attest, from a family of 7, and coming very poor. Mom and dad believe in education along. Brother, remember the preschools, right, that were in Corozal? They were the ones who helped a lot of the students there, so that we can go ahead and we can become somebody. Our home produced myself, a doctor, a lab tech, 3 teachers and 1 engineer, coming from a very poor family. But the difference, Madam President, was that we were afforded that opportunity by other people. And that is what we do, and that is what I do today, help a lot of students. Because it's my way of giving back to my community, and I do firmly and strongly believe that education is the gateway of success in this country. So let's put our efforts together. Let's try and do the best that we can for even one student that we can help. It might change their life. Just like this young lady graduated at 22 and valedictorian. Not because she couldn't go to school, it's because they couldn't afford it. Look at the opportunity she was given. Now she has another scholarship to go to a university which she's attending by the same mission. But she's one in many. And I know that many of these kids, once given the opportunity, they will prove themselves to be somebody and make a difference in this country. And Brother Herrera, they will increase those numbers who are given the opportunity. Madam President, I end this. Thank you very much.
I recognize Senator Bevin Cal.
Thank you, Madam President. Would also like to wish all Belizeans and our colleagues here a happy 2024. I'm sure that, we're moving in the right direction, and, we wish all the best to our Belizean people. I would also like to welcome Senator Suazo and our colleague, Senator Castillo. Madam President, this is another milestone of this government under the leadership of Minister Fonseca. It is obvious that this government is centered on young people, Madam President, and that must be applauded. Madam President, our education is on the right track, and we must stay on that track, Madam President. Make us stay up on track. Madam President, Madam President, I fully support this bill because, like I said, we're investing in our young people, and this government is centered on that. I listened to Senator Suazo earlier, and about his comments. He made some valid comments, but it also makes me wonder as a young person where he's at, because him and I are from the south, Madam President, Stan Creek and Toledo. And just at his backyard, Madam President, if he would at least do his research before coming here to ask about these resources. In the last budget, we approved monies for what we call the Education Upliftment Program, or what we refer to as the free education. In his backyard at the Lille Academy, Madam President, that program has enrolled. In his backyard again, Georgetown Technical High, Madam President, that free education is also rolling. At the IT vet, just in November, the Prime Minister announced that they will be investing $1.3 million at the IT vet in Stan Creek, Madam President. And again, a hallmark at that institution. 2 years ago, there was only an enrollment of about 60 students, Madam President. Today, after 2-3 years, there is an increase of up to 200 students now attending that IT vet, Madam President. So this clearly shows that our young people are now enrolling because the opportunities are there. Like Senator Antonio Herrera said, you know, if the opportunities are given, our young people will make use of it. And that's the reason why this government, Madam President, is using and giving these people these opportunities. We are investing in our young people. We're making sure that the taxpayers' money is being used to uplift our young people, Madam President. We're making sure that every grant received when it comes to education is invested in the young people, because we believe that education is key for success, Madam President. And I'm hoping, I don't want to preempt anything when it comes to the budget debate, Madam President, but I listen to them and I will remind them when that time comes, Madam President, because in this new budget, there will be 12 more schools added to this free upliftment project. And I'm sure that Senator Perifit, Senator Suazo, and Senator Herrera, if they come at that time, they will support that budget, Madam President, because, like I said, education, for the first time in Belize, is on the right track, and we want to ask the Belizean people to stay on track, to stay with this government, because we are on the right track. So stay on track.
I recognize Senator Linsford Castillo.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me say, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to once again serve in this session, in this sitting today. It is always a privilege for me to be here whenever I do get the opportunity. So once again, I want to thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to serve today. I would also like to take the opportunity to welcome Senator Suazo to this sitting, my brother. And again, I also want to take the opportunity to wish my fellow colleagues most happy and successful 2024. Madam President, I rise to support this Education and Training Amendment Bill 2023. And along with my other colleagues, I want to join my full support behind this bill. Because as far as I am concerned, this bill is long overdue, Madam President. At the end of the day, when I reflect on my own childhood and going to primary school, which is not too long ago, Madam President, just recently, I would say. But when I went to primary school, and my colleague Senator Antonio Herrera could attest, because we're both from the same district, we're from up north. When we left primary school, I could recall, and it is no exaggeration, more than half of my classmates did not go on to high school. They simply drop out. Some became parents immediately. Some went into the workforce. Some just never returned and received a formal education. So that in itself is an indication as to why we need to move swiftly when it comes to this. And this was in the early 80s, I would say. That has continued even up to today, where you have, and maybe it is a part of some of our culture and practices, where it is enough to just obtain a primary school education. Maybe that is a standard, or that is what some of our families settle for. Once I get to a primary school education, I am good. Madam President, it is time to raise the standard. And I think that is what this bill will do. Raising the standard in terms of education. If you look at the primary school population, and right now we're in February, you know, soon start to hear about graduation and all this type of thing. And then the students will move from one phase to another, in this case from primary on to secondary. And if you take just an anecdotal look at what will happen across the country, for argument's sake, if you have 10,000 kids graduating or leaving the primary school system, there are not 10,000 are they going into the secondary school system? Yes? It's not. I would dare say, and I don't have the statistics so I can't use figures, but I would dare say at least a third of that population will not go on. They want to just drop out of the system. They don't get the primary school education, and that is good. They settle with that. So when we talk about raising the standard, we will automatically see an increase in enrollment at the secondary school level. And that is good. And we have to applaud that. So just this one act, this one small step will be crucial in moving the education population forward. No longer 14, you could just decide here to drop out and get married, I'm going to work. You will have to remain in the school system. And so that is something that we have to support. And that in itself will have a lot of direct and indirect benefits, Madam President. Whole issue of truancy, we could talk about that all day, you know, and examine how this particular bill will make a difference when it comes to that. The whole issue of at-risk youth, something which is dear to my heart, that in itself will have a positive effect when it comes to reducing the number of at-risk young people in this country. The whole issue of the reduction of youth crime and violence, man, this one small step will address that issue. Now, they're not the answer to everything, but certainly we could immediately see how the area of youth crime and violence will be positively affected. Child labor, somebody mentioned earlier, and looked at the whole issue of child labor, and a slew of other issues. Madam President, I could see how such a bill will immediately impact. Now, Senator Suazo, of course, expresses concern about resources, as well as Senator Antonio Herrera. But using Senator Chanona's words, education has to be a priority. And it is a priority for this government. And so I am confident that with this, with the passing of this bill, we will see measures put in place. Because this bill does not exist in a vacuum. It has to go along it. You have this action over here, it has to have an effect over there. And so I am confident that this government will implement and enact and put in place the necessary resources so that we can ensure that our students, our young people, remain in the education system for as long as possible. I wish they would put it to 18 years old. But we have to go one step at a time. And like what Senator Kevin Herrera mentioned, it's still not far-reaching enough, Madam President. There's still a need to do more. But we have to start somewhere. And I must say that this bill, this Education and Training Amendment Bill, is a wonderful start. And I want to commend the government for this bold move. And again, I want to add my support to this. Madam President, thank you.
I recognize Senator Erica John.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to take this time to welcome Senator Jamal Sawaso, a very known individual in Dangriga. I've worked with Jamal and I believe that he has a lot to say all the time when it comes to young people. So, Jamal, I'm glad that we're able to be in the same environment. And I also want to welcome back Senator Castillo. I would also like to wish each member, or my colleague, and you, Madam President, Happy New Year to each and every one of you. Today I rise as I look at this bill presented in front of us, the Education and Training Amendment Bill 2023. I believe that this bill is a start to a powerful testament to this government's unwavering commitment to growth and development of its young people. Extending the age of compulsory from 14 to 16, I believe it's a bold statement. And it tells about the value we have placed on education and the value we place in our youth. I'm looking at 3 areas that I believe that this bill will impact our young people. For example, individual development. With the age increase, I believe that students have more longer comprehensive period to acquire more knowledge, can be skilled or academic. This will increase their professional development, where they will understand how to work situations with individuals, whether it may be at school or at home or in the community. There are times, as an educator, I see where there are some students who develop very slowly, and there are some who develop very rapidly. And I believe that with their individual pace of development, increasing the age and having them stay where they can more interact with individuals is going to be a plus for them. I also want to look at the better economic implication that it will have for our nation. It will enable our students to be better at what they are doing, where it may be in particular with scaffolding, or where you can be able to practice things over and over. We know that the more we practice, the better we get at things, and I believe that as students, the more tries we have, the more better we become. It's going to increase their competitiveness within the classroom, where they realize what they are good at, what they need to get better at, what they can hold on to, what they can let go of, and maybe sometimes they even find out that they're able to do things that they didn't even know they could have done. It is also going to drive sustainable growth. I say this because as an educator, our school students tend to do what is called project-based learning. And in the project-based learning, each child is responsible to develop an idea. They look within the community for issues that they see are problematic, and they need to come up with solutions. And most of the time, this is guided by the teachers, but everything comes from them. So I believe it helps them with competitiveness and sustainability, so that when they leave from the classroom, when they leave from that particular school, they're able to do. And finally, I would like to address the social impact. Senator Castillo explained how he is so happy that the government made this move, because we have to look at how having them in school will alleviate crime issues. This also shows our commitment to foster responsible citizens within the community. One of the things recently that are lacking with students is values. So we need to go back. The more we have them, the more we can educate them, the more we can train them, the more they can become better citizens to lead. They can become better citizens to innovate, better citizens to contribute significantly to their society. So, Madam President and colleagues, I stand to fully support this bill. Thank you.
Senator Michael Porfirio. Senator Chris Gowe.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of this bill and share the comments, sentiments with most, if not all, my colleagues here today. Before I get to that, I would also like to welcome Senator Suazo and my brother, Senator Castillo, here today, and to wish all here today a happy and blessed New Year. But getting back to the bill, as short a bill as it is, I think it has 3 sections and really one item, the increase of the compulsory age from 14 to 16. It forms a key and very critical part of the overall education strategy, engineered and led by the Ministry of Education. It also signifies the commitment of this Brisenia administration to education as the highest priority for this government, for the long-term sustainable development of our country. I think it's important to have a comprehensive look at education, look at the economy, having an understanding of what our goals and objectives are. To do that, we don't make piecemeal adjustments. We do that comprehensive analysis. We look at all areas. We look at the data. It's important that we are at all times data-driven in making informed decisions for the betterment of our people. When we look at that, when we start looking at the data, it leads us to understand where our problems and challenges are and what we need to do. We are thankful for the help that we get when we go through that process. Senator Chanona highlighted the partnership and the work of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and I would want to likewise express our appreciation for that support, that ongoing support. The analysis, the root cause analysis, has already been conducted in connection with that, and we are in the process of a joint design declaration in connection with education. Education having been prioritized as one of the, by this government, as that high priority, so much so that roughly 80% of the compact with MCC will be allocated to educational improvement. That 80% will constitute directly to education roughly close to $150 million. That's not borrowed money, that's grant money. But how will that money be spent, and how are we spending government's money in connection with education? The World Bank has conducted a public expenditure review, and I think the launch of that will be February 29th, this month. That public expenditure review includes an analysis of educational expenditures by the government. All these analyses highlight that government spends a lot of money on education, historically, and continues to do so. Government spends a lot of money on education as a percentage of total public expenditures relative to the entire Latin America and the Caribbean. We outspend by a quarter on a relative standpoint. With respect to the world and small Caribbean states, we outspend by an average of 1/3. So there is no doubt that there is a commitment, whichever administration we're talking about, there is a commitment to education, and government spends in furtherance of that commitment. But how it spends and what it spends on is the concern. Because if we are spending, yet what are the results? What are the outcomes? Let's look at those outcomes. I think when some of this information is a little bit oversimplified, but pre-primary education, you have roughly 2/3 of pre-primary age kids not in pre-primary school, not getting pre-primary education. Primary school, you have that ratio increase significantly. You have between 80 and 90% of kids of primary school age in primary school. But then you have a substantial drop-off when you get into high school. So much so that in high school, you are significantly below 70%. In fact, it has increased a bit And the figures indicate that the gross enrollment rate for 2021-2022 is 69.4%. That is still unacceptable. 69, so that means 3 out of every 10 high school age student, well, is not in school. Education is part of the story for a developing economy. You have to look at also the labor force and what is the impact that it has on the labor force, the opportunities for employment. And again, on data from a Statistical Institute of Belize figures, what we have as of 2021, 52% of the labor force has no form of post-primary education. So we're not, our kids going through primary school are not finishing high school. And what that means when they don't finish high school, they have trouble with skill required for the jobs that are available. There's a skills gap. There's a substantial skills gap. And that's what's been identified. That not only are kids not finishing school, but there's also a problem with the quality of education. And I know that I might be seen as a villain for saying this, but that low quality education ties back into not only about infrastructure, but the training of teachers. The teachers, in order to, or the students, in order to gain the quality of education, even if they go through high school, need to be properly equipped so that they can get the jobs that are available in this economy, in what is now being referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. But they are not getting that quality of education. So the result, the economic result, is that low quality education has led to a shortage of trained professionals in all industries in Belize. So it's not a small task that is before any administration when it comes to education. So spending the money is important, but it's important to spend the money efficiently and spending the money effectively. So to be able to do that, it's important to understand these root causes, these problems, so that these problems can be addressed. And the Ministry of Education has done this type of analysis and has come up with the policies that address these challenges. Recognizing that kids are not finishing or going to or finishing high school, what represents some of the problems why those kids are not going to or finishing high school? Well, one of them is cost, the cost of education. The cost of education at high school. And looking at that cost of education, as much as you have government-funded schools, government-aided schools, these government-aided schools, for example, they charge fees. And as whether you call those fees small or large, they are an added cost to education for those students who want to go to high school. So the policy of the Education Upliftment Program, what is, as Senator Kyle referred to as free education program, is critical to alleviate or address that challenge. And that's why the Ministry of Education has been very aggressive, calculated but aggressive in moving that free education strategy forward, with 9 schools in the south and in the south side gaining the benefit of free education. In the upcoming budget, that will be increased to 21. So from 9 to 21, an increase of 12 schools will now, in the upcoming fiscal year, gain the benefit of being fully funded for free education at the high school level. And that's not just tuition, that's books, uniform, I think even the first form, shoes, but the iPad or laptop or whatever you call it, tablet for first form, as well as the feeding program. So this is an extensive effort that comes with cost, but an extensive effort to address the very problems that we are facing to get kids in school. But part of that strategy also is to make it mandatory for kids to go to school. It's critical that kids go to school or have to go to school in this day and age. And that's where this legislation comes into play. Addressing that component, making sure that we raise that percentage, that gross enrollment rate, not from 69%, not to 70% or 80%, but to 100%. That is the only way we will turn this economic lethargy or historical economic lethargy to an elevated growth path for the long-term development of this country. So that I want to highlight, that this bill is a small but critical part of that overall education strategy. What I would like to complement with that is just a bit of news to come, work to happen when it comes to education. And just one component in terms of the MCC. Use of funds, the cost of finance for education. We recently had a new project loan from the IDB. That was roughly 30 million plus a grant of 10 million. The Skills for the Future program. That I think focuses in on exactly what it says. Educating for that fourth industrial revolution. That's highlighting what the focus of this administration is on, preparing our students for their future. But combined with that and combined with the budget of the Ministry of Education going forward, there's this MCC funding, grant funding, and what its purpose is for. I mentioned that near $150 million. What it's for is for the establishment of an educational quality assurance system to assess and improve the quality of management and teaching, as well as the achievement of learning outcomes. It's for capacity building for educational leadership and teachers, for provision of teaching and learning resources, for support to increase the percentage of primary graduates that enroll in and complete secondary school, and to support the establishment of a national training agency and build the capacity of the TVET sector to implement inclusive TVET programs that are aligned to labor market needs. So the effort of this government and the Ministry of Education is a comprehensive one that contemplates the needs not only within education but within the broader economy, the labor market needs, the development needs. And it looks at it not only in terms of throwing money, but putting money where it can be used in its most efficient and in its most effective way to produce the best outcomes, learning outcomes and otherwise. So wrapping all of that around this bill makes it clear the need for your support, colleagues, of a bill of this Education and Training Amendment Bill. Thank you.
Madam President, I want to thank senators for supporting the bill and for their helpful contributions. I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act. Honorable members, the question is that a bill for an act to amend the Education and Training Act, Chapter 3601 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to increase the age of compulsory education for a child and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
A bill for an act to amend the Education and Training Act, Chapter 3601 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to increase the compulsory education for a child, to increase the age of compulsory education for a child and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the National Women's Commission to advance Belize's commitments to gender equality and equity, to promote awareness of the national gender policy, to recommend remedial measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, and advise the Minister on all legislative and policy matters affecting women, to advocate for fulfillment of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, as well as other pertinent conventions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Again, Madam President, the bill is straightforward. It seeks to, first of all, convert the National Women's Committee to the Commission and to provide a legislative framework for this very important commission that provides advice and will be charged with much more responsibilities that are spelled out in the bill in terms of advising government and advising the Minister with responsibility for women's affairs, reducing discrimination under the convention, the CEDAW Convention, etc.
I recognize Senator Michael Purfey.
Thank you, Madam President. Wow. How can anybody, right, possibly object to something like that, right? Right? How can anybody possibly object to a bill that wants to advise on the formulation of national policy and programs concerned with the rights and interests of women? I mean, how can anybody, when you put it like that, object to this? Isn't it so? I mean, that's a good thing, you know. This is a good. You probably should have brought a National Men's Commission too. We need some help. But, Madam, Mr. President, I have great difficulty with this charade. This government likes to bring legislation that on the face of it, it looks noble. But when you really analyze it, it's anything but noble. It's like when you bring a budget or a supplemental and you have 10 things that are ridiculous, but you have one thing in there that nobody can object to. And if you object to the supplemental, you say, oh, you object to that one good thing. Think you're not smart or you think people stupid. A National Women's Commission. 13 members appointed by the minister. And if that not bad enough, the minister have to appoint the executive director too. For monies to be determined, quite possibly by that same minister, or they put it as prescribed. Mr. President, we have an office that is known as, or a person in an office as a special envoy for women and children. We have offices to deal with these issues. We have a Ministry of Human Development, which deals with man and woman. Are we saying that these people are not doing their jobs? Are we saying what? That we need this for what? This is a way, Mr. President, to find jobs for the government's cronies and lackeys, while you already cannot find money for existing public servants who are supposed to get their increment and their pay. You're adding to the wage bill on the guise that you have an interest in the advancement of women. Mr. President, this is the budget. Under the Ministry of Human Development, there is a Women and Gender Services department, you know. A category that already does this. Its budget for this year alone is $912,853 with 17 staff. 17 people in the Ministry of Human Development already look after women and gender services. Are these people not doing their job? That you need a National Women's Commission to add more to the wage bill? Since 2021, we'll say from March 2021 to 2022 for your first budget, $3,149,695 have been allocated for women and gender services, of which over $150,000 is just for consultancies. So what have these consultants told us in the last 3 years? We can't take what they have told us in the last 3 years and have the same ministry with the 17 staff formulate policy to advise the government. Why do you need a separate National Women's Commission? Why? It makes no sense. It is an unreasonable strain on an already burdened public service and the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Because nobody's going to give them any grants. They don't give the government grants. Not even Saudi Arabia give no grants. So only they get no grants for nobody. This will be funded out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And for what? For what? Mr. President, when you look, and that's just one part of the insult, you people said that you would engage in activity, and I will sound like a broken record if you come here like a broken record, that you're going to pass legislation to limit ministerial interference and power. You said that to the people. You said that to the people. And then, and to this day, more than 3 years into government, you're still bringing legislation that increases the already seemingly absolute power of your ministers. So now you will have this commission And there's a paragraph, that's the best part, you know. That's the best part. I'll probably save that one for second to last. The commission shall consist of 13 members to be appointed by the minister, including the executive director as ex officio. So the minister just appoint the people there. Who? Then the minister shall appoint the chairperson. The minister will appoint the commission, appoint the chair, and appoint the executive director. You couldn't at least let the commission appoint their own chair? Or let the commission appoint the executive director? The minister have to do all of that too. And if you wanted something for which you have total direction and control, then why don't you do that within your ministry with the 17 staff that you have, with a budget of almost $1 million a year? Just do the same thing. You can do it now. You don't need to add to the wage bill. Come on, man. Then, when I get to that super directly. But, Mr. President, if you look, how much how you pay them people I know? Much they get paid? Look at it, pay scale 1, 2, 3, 4. No, man, no. No, we're not on no pay scale business. No. 7.5, the salaries and other terms and conditions of service allowances payable to and of the chairperson and members shall be such as may be prescribed. What does that mean? It's as confusing as cabinet privileges. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? They know, Section 10, as I referred to, the minister appoints the executive director. Then, in addition to the 13 people who the minister hire and pay whatever he wants, the commission may appoint and employ at such remuneration and subject to such terms and conditions it thinks fit, such officers and employees as may be necessary for the efficient performance of the functions of the commission under this act. So in addition to the 13 people, you have the right to employ more people. Because the 13 people not enough. They're not enough. We need more people. So now you're up to 30. If you count the 17 from the human development, and you count the 13, and you may get even more. The salaries and allowances payable to the chairperson and members and administrative expenses, including salaries, allowances, and pensions payable to the officers and other employees, shall be paid out of the funds referred to in Section 13. Number 1, such sums as may from time to time be appointed by the National Assembly. Government money. We done the pay for 17 people who don't do nothing according to this bill. We want to pay for more. We don't got money. We don't pay the teacher. We don't pay the council. We don't got money. We don't pay 13 people who might hire 13 more. Grants from funding agencies. Nobody not giving them no grant. Then, this is the kicker. This is the kicker. Section 20. Put it under miscellaneous. So you appoint one commission, right? Then the commission could appoint more people, right? And consultants and everybody, right? Now this is it. The minister may, after consultation with the chairperson, give to the commission directions of a general character as to the policy to be followed in performance of any of its functions, and the commission shall give effect to such directions. The minister will tell you what if you come up with. The minister will say, you want to meet as a commission, you want to deliberate, you want to come up with ideas, but under these parameters, because they're telling you that the way I want to come up with, you want to study that. So what's the purpose of having a commission? What's the purpose of having a commission? What is the purpose of having a department of gender services? What's the purpose? This is double dipping. But this is a way to find plush employment for cronies who do not want to be public officers. That's what this is. You can make more money from the government to the National Women's Commission. You do not have to fall under the strains of being a public servant, and we pay you what we want. All on top of the fact that we already have a department that deals with this. So on will take something ugly and try to dress it up. But some people could say, and this is a charade, it is an insult to women for you to come to this National Assembly and try to hustle off of the struggles of women who suffer every day. That's my contribution, Mr. President. I do not support this bill.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chenono.
Thank you, Madam President. We rise with a clarification in accordance, in reference to the 3.2 under Part 2 of the bill, consisting 13 members to be appointed by the minister. Currently, the National Committee is chaired by the National Women's Commission and is comprised of organizations and not individuals who must work within the area of gender equality and gender-based violence. And it lists the Ministry of Human Development, Women and Family Support Department, National Security, Health, Education, Department of Youth Services, UN organizations, Magistrate Ombudsman's Office, NCFC, the Belize Network of NGOs, and community-based organizations. Our clarification is that if the Commission will continue to be comprised along these lines, on recommendations, because we do feel that while others have an opinion in terms of a men's commission, I will wait for the men to organize that one, that it is important for the national women's issues to be addressed in a meaningful way. I cannot say enough about what that looks like, and I also note that increasing participation of women in leadership, including political leadership, is a core function as well. So that one day perhaps the minister referenced will not always be a woman because there is only one or two women in the cabinet, but that becomes because that person is best suited to take on that responsibility. But certainly we endorse the fact that this is a critical function and that it should continue, but we do ask for the clarification in terms of the composition, because while at some point it could be manipulated, because others have manipulated in the past, other initiatives indeed, but that the initiative here is actually comprised, as has been previously put together, with groups. I don't think it's fair to say that the UN or other NGOs are serving any political function or are victim of any political manipulation. So that we would want to see that the issues that need specific address, and as chair of the Women's Parliamentary Caucus, we can certainly say that it's a function that we would like to also partner with the National Women's Commission to make sure that as parliamentarians we can play a role in addressing women's issues, so that moving forward we have that function being done. And we know, Madam President, that when we lift up women and children, we are lifting up not just homes, but communities and the nation on a whole. So we support this effort, but certainly we take note of the fact that it is giving a lot of responsibility to the minister, but we would certainly hope that there would be a strong inclination to do those actions on the recommendation of the members, and that those members are indeed persons working within, so that the recommendations that and the advice that is provided to the ministry is seen and heard, because it comes from a meaningful place and can meaningfully address the issues that we're confronted with at multiple levels. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Elena Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise just to share a few comments, Madam President, on the National Women's Commission Bill. A lot has been said already, some of which we have indeed discussed as the Congress. But we also want to raise the matter of the minister's, what word should I use? Strong involvement, if you will, in terms of this commission and the power, the powers that are given to him. And as Senator Perifit rightly said, we have from time to time raised the matter of going forward, reducing these matters within bills so that our ministers are not given all of this power. And indeed, there was the promise that this would have been done going forward. However, we are not seeing that, and so that is a concern of the NTUCB as well. In addition, Madam President, I must echo the concern raised by Senator Chanona as it relates to the composition, because we note that it speaks to persons to be appointed by the minister shall be from amongst persons of ability, integrity, and standing, no issue there, who have had experience in law, trade unionism, etc., etc. The NTUCB is concerned that organizations are not being named, and as such, the situation that occurred with Port of Belize, where persons were named to sit on the interim board without consulting these organizations, and naming persons from these organizations, of which I am one, that the organizations should be named as opposed to just saying persons who have experience in the various areas. And so instead of just saying experience in trade unionism, just saying persons from the NTUCB, from the business organizations, that sort of thing. And so they feel that in making these nominations broad, that it creates mischief in that the minister can, or the government can put whoever they want there and not consult with these organizations. And so that is the sentiment of the NTUCB, and I must share those sentiments. And so it is hope that, Madam President, that as we continue to present bills of this nature, that we look at, what has been that tripartite relationship that we've had, and as opposed to just naming and saying groups, just name organizations, where those organizations would be an integral part of these areas. And so, for example, if it is that we have named a trade union, then it should be under the NTUCB umbrella, and not just saying a trade union who has experience, a person who has trade union, or a person who has experience in trade unionism. And so those are some of the concerns, in addition to some of that Senator Perifit had raised from the NTUCB. We are concerned about the cost and what this would be in terms of increasing the budget, because we don't see any indication of what the salary, stipend, whatever those would be, included there. And we know that those details might not be there, but at least an indication of what that would be. And so the NTUCB is concerned that, yes, indeed, it's going to be adding to the budget, and we don't want that other areas that truly need budgetary support may not be getting the amount that they need, because we have to use some funds now to put in this commission. And so those are the concerns. I trust that those can be addressed. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, the record now reflects with an amazement and an abundance of clarity who is against the women in this country. I don't know whether it is informed by the violence of their leader, their legal advisor. I don't know what would have informed this position. But it is remarkable. You don't know, don't worry about it. It is remarkable, Madam President, that Senator Perry would address this Honorable Senate with his usual bluster in absolute ignorance that from the year after independence, 1982, the National Women's Commission exists. Be quiet, I will educate you. It's a difficult task, Swazo. Work with the man. Work with the man. That was used by somebody else. You have to put that in a quote. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 10.8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper be entered upon and proceeded with at this day sitting at any hour, though opposed.
Honorable members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour, though opposed. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, I was simply making the point that when I listened to Senator Perry, I was disappointed that he did not know that from 1982, that's a lie. That's just another lie. That's just another lie. The National, correct. The National Women's Commission has existed from 1982. The purpose behind this, Madam President.
Can we be silent while the leader of government business is speaking? Thank you.
The purpose behind this is very straightforward. To put the commission on a permanent legislative footing. It exists as a committee, appointed the members. It has a website, nwcbelize.org. It exists as a committee, as a commission, appointed by the minister. So this has been happening since 1982. We're now putting it in law. And we pretend as if it is something new and different. It has been operating with a budget from the Ministry of Human Development and Women's Affairs, and now we are putting it in legislation. But what Senator Perry did not advert to deliberately is the provision that the Commission now, as a matter of law, and I'm referring to Clause 5, (5)(1)(L). Collect and analyze data, monitor and submit reports to the minister on, and there is a whole slew of things there listed. Look at R, make periodical reports to the minister on any matter pertaining to women, in particular, various difficulties under which women work. And then 2, the minister shall cause all the reports referred to in subsection 1, L and R to be laid before the National Assembly, along with a memorandum explaining the action taken or proposed to be taken on the recommendation and the reasons for the non-acceptance, if any, of any such recommendations. There is no legal obligation for the work of the Commission in terms of its advice, its recommendations, and its report to be brought to the National Assembly. That is what it's doing, trying to make the work more transparent, Senator Perry. Say it louder. The appointment of the executive director, there's an executive director now. Nothing new. Somebody's operating the place. We're now enshrining it in law so that it has a legal basis. Nothing new. Finance, accounts, and audits. Clause 14. The budget has to be presented to the financial secretary and the Minister of Finance so that it can be included in the annual budget of the country. Nothing new. Now, as a matter of law, there has to be audits and accounts. Under Clause 17, by law, there has to be an annual report. So, Madam President, it is only Somadawega Redeye who has an immunity to understanding, who clearly has an allergy to advancement, transparency, and openness, would oppose making the National Women's Commission a lawful, legally established commission with all its powers, responsibilities set out in law, its budget and finances having to be brought to the National Assembly as a matter of law. Its reports have to be brought to the National Assembly to be laid on the table so that the people can see its work. Madam President, anybody who is against this is against women and the development of women in this country. We on this side support this bill 100%, and I ask that the question be put.
Again, I ask that we be reminded of Standing Order 40, particularly B, for the senator to remain silent while another senator is speaking. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the National Women's Commission to advance Belize's commitments to gender equality and equity, to promote awareness of the national gender policy, to recommend remedial measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, and advise the minister on all legislative and policy matters affecting women, to advocate for fulfillment of the Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, as well as other pertinent conventions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the National Women's Commission to advance Belize's commitment to gender equity, equality and equity, to promote awareness of national gender policy, to recommend remedial measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, and advise the minister on all legislative and policy matters affecting women, to advocate for the fulfillment of the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, as well as other pertinent convention, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Families and Children Act, Chapter 173 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to clarify the obligation of a spouse to maintain a non-biological child of a marriage, to change the name of the committee from the National Committee for Families and Children to the National Commission for Families and Children, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, as the long title of the bill says, the first thing is to clarify the obligation on men to maintain their children. And so every man is required to maintain his own children and the children of any child of his, where such children are unable to maintain themselves. So essentially your grandchildren, an obligation on you to maintain your grandchildren. If that is the law, that is the law. If that grandchild is unable to maintain himself or herself, or is ill and cannot be located, then the obligation to maintain arises. Let me repeat. In respect of the grandchild, it is only where the father or mother of the child is ill, cannot be located, or are unable to maintain themselves. So, a father must maintain his child. With respect to the grandchildren, that obligation rests on the mother and father to maintain that child. However, if that mother or father is ill, cannot be located, or unable to maintain themselves, then the father, the grandfather, obligation to maintain is imposed. Madam President, this comes out of a decision of the Supreme Court, and so the law is being clarified that the obligation of the grandfather is not forever and always. It is only if the parent cannot maintain the child in these circumstances. Similarly, 49A, every spouse is hereby required to maintain, in addition to the children of that spouse, every child living with either spouse at the time of the marriage. So again, two people living in common law union or are married, but one of them or both of them have children separate from that union. There is an obligation to maintain those children like they would their own. And for the purposes of this section, spouse includes a party to a common law union. This obligation to maintain a child who is not your direct descendant shall cease in the case of marriage. So if the person you are living with in a common law union or married, divorces and marries somebody else, that child of that person, you are no longer obliged because the person has married someone else. And in the case of a common law, when that union terminates. Again, Madam President, just to make clear, this comes out of a decision of the Supreme Court where the law as it is put on the man only and not the woman the obligation to maintain the child of his former spouse even after they had separated and divorced and they were no longer living together and she had moved on. That child, the law said that the man should maintain that child. The Supreme Court found that to be unconstitutional because the obligation was placed only on the man and not on the woman in similar circumstances, so it was discriminatory. And so the law here is seeking to clarify the position, to put the obligation on the man and the woman in these particular circumstances.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfect.
Madam President, as I understood the leader of government business to say, that the obligation is now on the man and the woman. But the papers I got from the National Assembly sent to me, it only speaks about man. Section 48. We're talking about 49, okay. So 48, but 48 remains the man. Okay. Madam President, I do not support. The court is the court. And if the court has made a decision, if they interpret the law in such a way as it is written, and it comes with a result that's not what we accept or what we like, with all due respect to the court, we are Parliament. And they can make a decision in the High Court, but we in Parliament, we make the law. This is an opportunity, Madam President, to make a law that is sustainable to people and makes sense. You do not have to follow every ruling of the court if you think that the ruling of the court brings about a result that is untenable in our society. You have to follow it if that's the law and that's the ruling, but we as the National Assembly have an obligation to pass laws to correct what might be the current laws in the country. We have an obligation and opportunity, Madam President, to look carefully at the current law, what the court has decided, and we can change that. That is the power of Parliament. We have equal powers as the court, as another arm of government. They're not superior to us. We make the laws. And I am saying, Madam President, that the laws that we are trying to pass here today, in my view, are very, very egregious. It may seem noble, it may seem like you're trying to find some way, but it is tough because you're not considering consequences. Just like when you want to have a person be in school till they're 16, which is a noble concept, but if you don't have the infrastructure to support it, then you can't accomplish it. Madam President, according to this, I have a child. And Madam President, no matter how hard some parents try, sometimes your children don't turn out the way they should turn out. It's very unfortunate. So now I'm 85 years old. And I can only run 5 miles a day as opposed to the 10 that I run today. I'm receiving a pension and small social security. And my son, who is not able to maintain himself, has 3-4 children that he doesn't maintain. That falls on me. As an elderly grandfather with limited means, you get to the same problem. How can you expect people to take on the responsibilities of another human being? You know, Madam President, the great dealer once coined a phrase. He's the first person I heard it from, actually. If you dead, then I'll bury me, you know. If you have a child as an adult, your responsibility is for that child. You cannot transfer that to another individual. By law, usually as custom, Madam President, we in our society, grandparents play a huge role in the rearing and caring for children. But now you're making it by law that they have to. How can you put that? We have an opportunity. I don't care if that's the law now. I don't care if that's what the Supreme Court or the High Court said. We have an opportunity to fix it. No! We're Parliament. And we need to ensure that we don't burden grandparents to have a law that mandates them to look after children that they didn't make. that they didn't make? No, if the grandparents don't look after them, who will look after them? Well, that's a good question. But what if the grandparent himself, because only the man, what if the grandfather himself is not able to maintain himself? Huh? What if I'm in a home where I need care? I'm not even able to maintain myself. How will I maintain grandpicnic? That's a serious obligation you're putting into people, and you better make sure you have the infrastructure to save it, to allow it to happen. Because if people can't do it, then you're not solving the problem with this piece of legislation. So the 85 now, Mr. Perryfield can lock you up, you know. Why, sir? Well, you're going grandpicnic, we're not in 18. You know what I'm saying? You have a grandpicnic where I only maintain. I worked hard and maintained my children. If my son can't maintain for his child, then lock him up. Or make him pay. Why do I have to pay? That we have an opportunity to have the law reflect that undoubtedly. Change it. This, I don't care what no court say, I don't care. Change it. Make it make sense. Madam President, the second part of it, we have to make it make sense too, you know. We have an opportunity to make the law say, I have a child. I get into a relationship with someone. We get married or one day have a child. If you mandate me then to look after that child, then the biological father is what? Off the hook? He has no responsibility now then. And so if I have 3 or 4 baby mothers, I just have to hope that 3, 4 and then find new man. And that way I have no responsibility for my no picnic at all. That cannot work. That cannot make sense. If you make a child, whether that child's mother is in a relationship with another man or married to another man or not, you still have to maintain that child because that's your child. Not to put your responsibility of rearing children on another man. You for mind your picnic, whether they are with you or not, or whether the mother of that child is with another man. It is, I don't know. I don't know where they get these concepts from. It's amazing. We have an opportunity to make this thing make sense. And I think, Madam President, there is might be a little drafting error. It says every spouse is hereby required to maintain, in addition to the children of that spouse, every child living with either spouse. So there are 2 categories of children. There's my biological child, and there's the child of who I'm with. 2 categories of children, just for the sake of construction. Because it says the obligation of a spouse under subsection 1, which covers them together, in the case of a marriage upon judicial separation or divorce, shall end. But it cannot mean that your obligation to maintain your biological child ends. Even if you bring a child to a marriage, and that woman brings a child to a marriage, you separate or you divorce, you still have to maintain your biological. No. The exception should be only to be. I think that is the intention of the no, man. It says here, the obligation of a spouse under subsection 1, the whole subsection 1. Man's spouse in relation to any person means the husband or wife. Yes, but under this then, I can understand you pass legislation to say you're no longer required to maintain the child of the other person. I understand that. That's the intention of the law. But what it is saying is a bit confusing. You have to make it specific. No, confusing to anybody who has actually bothered to read it. You have to separate the types of children. Because even if you are in a marriage or you're divorced, you're still required to maintain your child, no matter what. Unless that child goes to live with his or her mother with another man, then you don't have to maintain no children because once any of your children live with another, mothers live with another man, you don't have any obligation at all to maintain that child. I think, Madam President, that that's not correct. The biological father, the biological parents of a child should under no circumstances be relieved of the responsibility of maintaining their children and putting it on the shoulders of someone else. I don't agree with that at all. And also, Madam President, I cannot agree that I am obligated to not only take care of my children, but hope that none of my picnic end up worthless, can maintain for their children, and then I have to fill in by law and maintain those children. No, Madam President, we're at a point where we can correct that. If that is the interpretation of the High Court, and that is the law, fine, we can change it to make it make sense. Thanks, Madam President.
Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I can't agree with Senator Perifete anymore than I do. I think that I think the bill could actually have the opposite effect of what it is trying to achieve. I know that there seems to be an effort to secure the well-being of children, and I think that is a noble effort. I think that in the instance of the grandparent, where it becomes mandatory that they maintain children, where their children are unable to, whether through loose lifestyle practices or whatever it is, I think is extremely unfair. And this is where I think perhaps maybe a better approach to that could have been that the state, through the grandparents, the state financially supporting those kids in that type of situation, perhaps through the grandparents, would have been a better approach. I think that Senator Perifete is right. Is when grandparents are in their retirement and may not be earning any type of substantial income, maybe a pension or something, maybe their savings, that could be depleted very quickly if they have to get into that whole child-rearing exercise or obligation again. So I think that's certainly an area that needs to be addressed, very important area to be addressed. And the other part of it, Madam President, I think that to ask someone who goes into a union to be legally obligated for children that they're not the biological parent for, to me is a little unfair, and to me really lets the biological parent of that child off the hook. And in no way should the biological parent be not obligated to take care of his or her children throughout the years when those children need to be taken care of, through the age of 18 or through school or whatever it is. But I think that is extremely important, and I think that this type of approach, Madam President, will actually, in my view, lead people to avoid that type of situation, because it really brings a burden and an unfair responsibility to persons. I understand completely that there's a need to take care of children, there's a need to take care of the vulnerable, there's a need to make sure that the welfare of children is looked after and secured. But I also think that we have to be fair in the process. And I think that the way this bill is presented, I think will not achieve what it seeks to achieve. Thank you, Madam President.
Ira recognize Senator Janelle Chinona.
Thank you, Madam President. I think this is the type of national conversation that we should be having, because as we're hearing, this has implications across the board. Because when you get into the issue of fairness, to segue from Senator Herrera's comments, then it also raises a dynamic of, well, for the state and for the taxpayer, is it quote unquote fair that children are born to the mercy of the world, abandoned by everybody, and then the taxpayer has to then meet the needs of those children? So I am grateful for this opportunity that this judgment from the court has triggered it. I think we can all look at examples, but I do think this would have been an opportunity to have some type of conversation, some type of, let me know when you finish. I do think it's important for us to make sure that we are, as has been said, I fully agree with it, create laws that make sense and create laws that address what the issues are. And I have stood in this honorable house before and said we don't talk about sex. And it is a national fact that men and women are having sex and having children, and it is costing us in multiple ways. We spoke earlier about keeping children in school, the trauma of some of these experiences, these homes that these children are coming from, because they are born into relationships to create a financial tie to a man. Men who have 30 children, 45 children. How can you even begin? I know people that have one child and are buckling, and two working parents can't afford to maintain this child and figure out how you're going to pay for this child to get to college. So we really need to have an honest national conversation about how we're going to look at how the responsibilities that are tied, because I personally fully support that there are due responsibilities and implications if you put yourself in a situation and a child emerges. That child is an innocent. You have to have responsibility for everything that comes from that child or as a result of that child being born. If you have special needs, I have heard men tell their partners, you could go pack up all and pick and move in another lady and have another batch. We cannot as a society endorse this dismissive air to responsibility. And I think if more responsibility was attached to sexual relationship and unsafe sex or unprotected sex, then that can't fall to taxpayers either. And certainly that cannot be borne by the innocent children who then have to figure out their way in this world because they were unwanted or because they thought that if I get one baby for so-and-so, I set and I have to work. Those are the social dynamics at play, and I really call that if this attempt to address this situation triggers a national conversation, we really need to have that conversation so that we really get to where we need to go and we are not creating casualties either on the parental or partner level, but also at the taxpayer, and certainly most importantly to the children of this nation. We really need to recognize that if we are creating children or creating situations where children, the future leaders, the future teachers, the future everybody, are damaged or incompetent because of the situations they are being born into at dramatic levels, we really need to get serious about where it is. And I will tell you, Madam President, it is a sad fact that more and more the state is having to fill the role that traditionally grandparents, aunties, cousins have taken in children who find themselves in this situation, but more and more, for multiple reasons, children are being abandoned by their families, 2, 3, getting into these orphanages, and really that is a problem that we really need to recognize and address, because that is not being naturally done in the way that traditionally our society adopted children to keep them into the home and to keep that biological connection there. And I'm sorry that some people think that's a laughing matter, but it's really serious. Thank you.
Madam President, sorry.
I missed you, Senator Elena Smith. I recognize Senator Elena Smith.
Thank you, Madam President. I know we want to get out of this heated discussion. But, Madam President and Leader of Government Business can correct me if I make any mistakes in terms of the original law. But in discussing this bill, Madam President, we looked at 48, most of 48 comes from the original bill, right? And we thought that the way this was written, we have to pay attention to what life was in the earlier days. We had women who stayed at home, took care of the home, and then mostly it was the men who were working, and so the men were responsible for everything. The case that triggered, I believe, the amendment to this bill was the one with Steve, what do you pronounce his name? Right, where in that case, if I am correct, it was a matter of him being held responsible for taking care of children that were not his. So it wasn't his biological children. And so it was to correct that, or it was to address that unfairness, if you will, that as a man, I am being obligated to take care of children that are not mine biologically. And so, they have a father who can take care of them. I'm no longer with the mother, that sort of thing. So that portion, we understand, was deleted to correct that decision by the courts. However, the existing portion that still remains here is the issue. Because as we've heard, we are saying that the father of a child, and the mother of course, should be held responsible. But the law as it was and as is now is holding the grandfather responsible in the event, under certain circumstances, that if the father cannot care for these children because of ABC, then the grandparent, the grandfather, should do so. And I look, Madam President, at, for example, my own father, who passed away about a year or so ago. He was, 92 when he died. He had one son. So just imagine my brother had children that he didn't take care of. My grandfather, who was 92, 91, based on this law, because this was a law back then, could have been held accountable for any child that my brother didn't take care of. Am I correct, Leader? Because that was the law. And so how then could my poor father, the grandfather of these children, not working anymore, being 90, 91, 92, be able to take care of these children? I fully endorse the comments of my colleagues because, yes, we want to ensure that our children are taken care of. We want to ensure that when children are made, they are not left to fend for themselves, because as a parent, and in this case as a father, I decide that I have moved on from your mother, so I have nothing to do with you. I don't need to take care of you. That is fully understood, that we want the children to be taken care of. But from the perspective of the NTUCB, we believe that it is putting the burden where it ought not to be. Not on the grandparent, it should be on the parent. And so 48 then is an issue for us. And while 49, looks at both parents or spouse, both whether you're a husband or a wife, it then relieves you, based on what we are reading, it relieves you once there's that separation, you are relieved of certain responsibilities. And so as Senator Perry-Feet was saying, it may be from our end that we are reading it incorrectly, but what we are gathering is that that obligation is set on one side, set on the men. But if you are separated, then you are free. And at no point in time we want for our fathers to believe that once you separate from your spouse or even the mother, that you no longer have a responsibility. While we may understand that that might not be the intention, or that is not the intention, I think that maybe the way it is worded, the way it is written, just following behind 48, may cause some misunderstanding of the intent or the true meaning of what it is saying. And so, Leader of Government Business, you may be able to enlighten us, but this has caused a tremendous confusion, concern relating to the way the bill is related, because, as I said, our colleagues feel that it is quite unfair, it's not balanced, and it's not right to be burdening grandfathers with the children of their children, even though it has some specific reasons for doing that. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, I will start by saying this. It is remarkable to me that we just debated the National Women's Commission bill. A lot of noise was made. You know what is one of the legal obligations that the Women's Commission will now have? To review existing laws affecting women and recommend amendments thereto so as to suggest remedial legislative measures to meet any lacuna, inadequacy, or shortcoming. A lot of noise. Oppose it. But here, the discussion that Senator Chanona says needs to be had. The law in the National Women's Commission provides for it. Madam President, Senator Smith's analysis of Section 48 is quite right. It was clear, it was rational, it was logical, and it was informed, unlike what we have heard from across the floor. The law on the books today, Section 48 of the Families and Children's Act, says, every man is hereby required to maintain his own children, and also, A, every child, whether born in wedlock or not, which his wife may have living with her at the time of her marriage with him, and B, the children of any child of his, so long as the children respectively are unable to maintain themselves. The law on the books says every man must maintain, 1, every child of his, and every child, whether born in wedlock or not, which his wife may have, living with her at the time of her marriage with him. That has been deleted because of the court case. Because what was happening is that the wife has a child, you all have a union, that union comes to an end, and the law as it currently stands, the obligation of the man to maintain that woman's child continues, even though she has gone on. So that has been taken out. What 48 in the bill before us is exactly what remains once that has been taken out. The obligation of the grandfather to maintain his grandchildren is on the books today. That is what the law provides today. So, Section 48, Madam President and members of the Senate, simply takes out a provision because of a court case and leaves in place what is there already. The policy decision as to the obligation of a grandfather to maintain his grandchildren must be informed I have heard senators in here, and I believe some said today, the importance of the family unit, the importance of being able to allow children to go to school who can't afford to go to school. What this law is saying is that where the child, let me read it, an obligation of a man to maintain the children of any child of his grandchildren, only arise where the father or mother of the child is sick, cannot be located, or unable to maintain themselves. In order to keep the same children who we said should stay in school until 16, if their parents are sick, or cannot be located, or the parents can't maintain themselves, there is an obligation on the grandfather to maintain. Madam President, the law on maintenance of spouses, of children, is well developed. And everybody is aware that grandparents may have retired, grandparents may have limited income or limited savings. No court, and this is a cry often heard by women, in order to make a maintenance order, there has to be an assessment of means and capacity to pay. So nobody will go to a grandfather and say, this picnic needs $1,000 a month paid. Grandfather must say, hold on, my pension is $700. I have rent, I have light, I have water, etc. So the maintenance payment by the courts, who are experts in this, do an assessment of the capacity of the grandfather to pay. So, this notion that they are bankrupt, these poor grandfather at 92, etc., will not arise because the courts deal with this on a daily basis. And in fact, you hear many women complain that the maintenance order are only $20 and $30, and the man have next woman, the man they drink, etc., etc. They are complaining that it's too low. So I think it is only reasonable to appreciate that the obligation here is in order to ensure that children who are vulnerable because their parents are sick, cannot be located, or are unable to maintain themselves, there is another family member who is looked at before the state has to step in. And that is the purpose of that legislation. And I repeat, it's already on the books. 49. And I should just say this. 49 itself, Madam President, in the law on the books, just like how 48 imposes a duty on the man to maintain his child, the next section, 49, imposes a duty on the woman to maintain her child and his child. 49A should not be read in isolation. There is nothing in 49A that says that the man is no longer required to maintain his child, that the mother or the woman is no longer required to maintain the child. It says every spouse, so it doesn't say parent, every spouse is hereby required to maintain, in addition to the children of that spouse, every child living with either spouse at the time of the marriage. So, 48, the man must maintain a picnic. 49, the woman must maintain a picnic. 49A is dealing with a different scenario. It is saying that if Tom and Mary come together, whoever bring whatever picnic into that relationship, they are obliged to take care of those children. That is what it is addressing. 48, the man must maintain the child. 49, the woman. 49A is saying when you come together and you bring your children from different partners, that unit is required to maintain those children. And 49.3 goes on to say it comes to an end when that union comes to an end. That is the purpose and intent, Madam President. I think it is pellucid I think it is commendable, and it fosters the intention and purpose behind this legislation to support and strengthen and maintain family unit and to protect vulnerable children. I commend the legislation to the Senate.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Families and Children Act, Chapter 173 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to clarify the obligation of a spouse to maintain a non-biological child of a marriage, to change the name of the committee from the National Committee for Families and Children to the National Commission for Families and Children, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bill for an act to amend the Families and Children Act, Chapter 173 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to clarify the obligation of a spouse to maintain a non-biological child of a marriage, to change the name of the committee from the National Committee for Families and Children to the National Commission for Families and Children, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Harbors and Merchant Shipping Act, Chapter 234 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the regulation of marinas, to provide for the requirements to show financial capabilities of foreign vessels to sustain lawsuits and other liabilities, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, the law here is proposing to provide the power in the minister to insist that vessels coming into Belize have some form of security in the event that an accident takes place within Belize, because that vessel is going to want to leave as quickly as you can, and therefore the proposal here is that a bond from an insurance company up to $1 million will be required. And then secondly, Madam President, it is to provide power to make regulations to regulate marinas. The regulation of marinas shall be done in a coordinated and concerted manner with the Department of the Environment to mitigate the environmental impact as a result of construction, manufacture, design, licensing, registration, or maintenance of marinas. Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Harbors and Merchant Shipping Act, Chapter 234 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the regulation of marinas, to provide for the requirement to show financial capabilities of foreign vessels to sustain lawsuits and other liabilities, to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
A bill for an act to amend the Harbor and Merchant Shipping Act, Chapter 234 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the regulation of mariners, to provide for the requirement to show financial capability for foreign vessels to sustain lawsuit and other liabilities, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Private Security and Investigation Services Control Act, Chapter 13801 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to empower the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board to issue firearm licenses to security companies and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this is a consequential amendment as arising from the establishment of the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board, and it's just amending the Private Security and Investigation Services Control Act to ensure that it is that board that provides the licenses for the security companies. I ask that the question be put, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Private Security and Investigation Services Control Act, Chapter 13801 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to empower the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board to issue firearm licenses to security companies and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
A bill for an act to amend the Private Security and Investigation Service Control Act, Chapter 13801 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to empower the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board to issue firearm license to security companies and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Committee of the whole Senate on Bills and Motion.
Honorable members, in accordance with Standing Order 68A, the Senate will now resolve itself into the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee, a committee of the whole Senate, to consider the motion referred to it, and thereafter, in accordance with Standing Order 54, the Committee of the whole Senate, to consider the bills that were read a second time. Honorable members, I will now take the chair as the chairperson of the Constitution and Foreign Affairs Committee, and then as the chairperson of the Committee of the Whole. I will ask the visitors to please clear the gallery at this time. Recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, the Constitutional and Foreign Affairs Committee has met and considered a resolution authorizing the ratification of the amendment to paragraph 2 of Article 25 of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, Motion 2024, and has agreed that it be returned back to the Senate for adoption. I therefore move that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable Senate authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the amendment to paragraph 2 of Article 25 of the Treaty of Tlatelolco. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Reporting and third readings of bills.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to report that the Committee of the Whole Senate has considered a Summary Jurisdiction Offences Amendment Bill 2023 and the Criminal Code Amendment Number 2 Bill 2023 and passed them with amendment. I now move that the bill be read.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Offences Act, Chapter 9(8) of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to upgrade the use of threatening words or behavior from a petty offense to a serious offense, and to provide for matters connected thereto, therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time as amended. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the definition of aggravated assault, to rationalize and increase the penalty for threat of death and similar character offenses, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time as amended. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Madam President, I rise to report that the Committee of the Whole Senate has considered the National Accreditation Council of Belize Amendment Bill 2023, the Education and Training Amendment Bill 2023, the National Women's Commission Bill 2023, Families and Children Amendment Bill 2023, Harbors and Merchant Shipping Amendment Bill 2023, and the Private Security and Investigation Services Control Amendment Bill 2024, and passed them all without amendment. I now move that these bills be read a third time.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the National Accreditation Council of Belize Act, Chapter 3901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the registration of institutions and providers with the Council, and to provide for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Education and Training Act, Chapter 3601 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to increase the age of compulsory education for a child and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the National Women's Commission to advance Belize's commitments to gender equality and equity, to promote awareness of the national gender policy, to recommend remedial measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, and advise the minister on all legislative and policy matters affecting women, to advocate for fulfillment of the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, as well as other pertinent conventions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Families and Children Act, Chapter 173 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to clarify the obligation of a spouse to maintain a non-biological child of a marriage, to change the name of the committee from the National Committee for Families and Children to the National Commission for Families and Children, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Harbors and Merchant Shipping Act, Chapter 234 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to provide for the regulation of marinas, to provide for the requirement to show financial capabilities of foreign vessels, to sustain lawsuits and other liabilities, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Private Security and Investigation Services Control Act, Chapter 13801 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to empower the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board to issue firearm license to security companies and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the Summary Jurisdiction Act, Chapter 98 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. A bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. A bill for an act to amend the National Accreditation Council of Belize Act, Chapter 3901 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. A bill for an act to amend the Education and Training Act, Chapter 3601 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. A bill for an act to provide for the establishment of the Women Commission to advance Belize's commitments to gender equality and equity, to promote awareness of gender, to promote awareness for the national gender policy, to recommend remedial measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, advise the minister on all legislative and policy matters affecting women, to advocate for the fulfillment of the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, as well as other pertinent conventions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Bill for an act to amend the Families and Children Act, Chapter 173 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. A bill for an act to amend the Harbors and Merchant Shipping Act, Chapter 234 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020. Bill for an act to amend the Private Security and Investigation Service Act, Chapter 13801 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
I wish to recognize Senator Bevan Kal, who had asked to speak on the adjournment.
Thank you, Madam President, and good afternoon again, colleagues. Madam President, the Maya tenure case, Maya land right case, has taken headlines during these couple of weeks and days, Madam President, and as a Belizean and as a proud Maya person, Madam President, I wish, well, a lot of people have been reaching out to me and asking me what my stance is when it comes to this case. And my answer would be, Madam President, is one, the decision, any decision that is made by the communities will be respected. And I respect that, Madam President. I want to make that as clear as possible. But, Madam President, these decisions must be made by the community with a majority vote as to which direction they want to go, Madam President. I will have my say when it comes to my community, Madam President. I believe that is where I will be able to vote and voice my concern as to this topic, Madam President. But what I would like to ask is that for every Maya person, especially the young people, Madam President, for them to be informed. We need to make an informed decision. We need to hear the advantages and disadvantages of having communal land, which, from my understanding, will be just one title given to a community, and the members cannot then have a title to their own, versus having going the private land, whereby every member of that community would be would have an opportunity to have a piece of land to their name, Madam President. Again, that is the decision that will be made by each community, and we're going to respect that, Madam President. But my message here to all Maya persons, and especially young, because we're the ones that will be affected regardless of what position our community takes, Madam President, that for them to be informed, to go to the consultations that will be happening. And I'm here to also echo and remind the villagers of Big Falls that the team of the government will do its first community consultation meeting on this issue, especially the policy, Madam President. So Sunday at 1 o'clock in Big Falls Community Center will be the first community consultation, and we ask the villagers to come out, to give their feedback, to ask their questions in a respectful way, Madam President, because presently there's a lot of emotions that is going on, and we need to do and ask our questions, address our concerns in a respectful way, Madam President. I think that is important, and my message again is to whenever these consultations comes in your community, that is your time to ask the questions that you need. It's not going to be on social media. Social media will not serve us any purpose, Madam President. But what we need is to have the technical persons in these communities. We ask the questions so that we can make that informed decisions. Thank you, Madam President.
Honorable members, the question is that the Senate do now adjourn. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The Senate now stands adjourned.